very warm welcome back to the channel, and in this video I'd like to talk to you about how easy it is for media companies and apps indeed that give you news content to give you the wrong idea, misinformation, and to somewhat mislead you into what you're supposed to think about any given topic. As many of you will already know, we look at Chinese news and news within Chinese apps, and to that end there's a certain app that we've looked at in with Chinese news on it, which Google will helpfully translate, and I have it on good authority from Easy Chinese Cooking that this is an accurate translation. So here's the article itself, which is ultimately drawing from a number of international articles. But as I said, this is just to give you an idea about how news can get misinterpreted and somewhat give you the wrong idea. This even draws on the Daily Mail here, which has even given some views of mine when they sought my views, accurately I might add. But Google helpfully translates this article into English so I can read it more easily. And this is where we start to see some of the inaccuracies come up, not least of which with our Andrea Burkhardt, who you will all be familiar if you've got any interest in this topic whatsoever, and can catch our previous video together here on this channel. I'll link that in the description for you to watch later. Please remind me if I forget, because I often forget. But here's the first inaccuracy. It firstly refers to Andrea as a Depp fan. Now, even in the first three words in respect of this, I have to state a correction here, because Andrea doesn't describe herself as a Depp fan, doesn't describe herself as a fan of anybody that she speaks of in these topics on her channel. She described her channel as a deep dive channel to expose and reveal, if you like, the truth and transparency of various issues, because she believes, as I do, that everybody deserves to be able to see very clearly what the evidence was behind a case. I've also said before that I am not just an out-and-out Depp fan, and if the result were very different, I would be speaking of this trial very differently. I'd be speaking of how the evidence was wholly against him, and that's why the jury came to the verdict, and so on and so forth. So that's the first thing. If you look on Andrea's Twitter and YouTube, and if you're not following and you're not subscribed, by the way, I will put those links in the description below as well, and you very much need to remember to do that. But so much so that Andrea had to release a press release to detail why she had sought these documents that were sealed. And yes, indeed, there were thousands of pages sealed for very good reason. For example, you might remember Jennifer Howell's declaration was sealed because ultimately it was deemed to be hearsay. There were steps that could have been taken that might have brought it into evidence, such as the evidence of Whitney, which could have made this an inconsistent statement, and so on. So there could have been ways to bring that in as contradictory evidence and previous inconsistent statements, but we do detail that more in our other video. But moving back to this opening statement here, a Depp fan, as this article refers to Andrea, which, as I said, is not entirely accurate. Even in the next phrase is also inaccurate, I would say, believing that there must be information against Amber. That is not the reason, as I understand it from my brief interview with Andrea just recently in the video that I'll link below. It wasn't because she believed that there must be information against Amber. That was not the reason that she sought to get these documents revealed to you, to be able to see these, to get a copy of these documents. But yes, it was crowdfunded to get a copy of these documents. And as you can see here, received a lot of press inquiries and so on, and made this press release. This goes on to make some other statements which I would say are somewhat misleading in and of themselves. Coming down to this one, which I've talked about previously, the photos and audios handed over by Depp showed signs of modification. Actually, no, they didn't. I've talked about this before. The creation date that meant that the file was created at a certain point is not evidence that the file's been modified. It's just evidence of when that particular copy of that file was created. As I said in my previous videos, if you were to copy and paste a particular file on your computer, it will give you a creation date of today, if that's when you do it. That doesn't mean you've modified the file. It is not signs of modification. It could be, of course, but by itself, it is not. Also, here it says, reiterating, similarly, Depp's photos has traces of modification, but not used as evidence in court. And then there's information between this Julian, Ackert, and as you'll remember, I looked at the evidence given by Neumeister, which essentially contradicted this point. And there's several points here. Not only was it not relevant to issues in the case, but it wasn't evidence that it was manipulated. It was just the creation date, which is what I said previously. And again, so that goes into that here. There are several more of these photos, all claiming that the time of the taking does not match the metadate. Well, and then it says, for some reason, this information didn't make it to court. So if you were to read this article just by itself, you might take the view that, whoa, they've really tried to hide this information. They've tried to mislead everybody. They've hidden this information from the jury. This is evidence that these files were, manipulated, modified, and ultimately that was all hidden from the jury. But of course, it wasn't evidence of, well, really anything. It was just a different creation date. And so, as I said, every document that wasn't given to the jury had a specific reason as to why it wasn't given to the jury. And here, metadata shows that the audio was edited. Again, it didn't. If anything, the arguments were that the audio had beginning and ending in the middle of a sentence. But again, that didn't prove anything. It only proved that that's when the recording was made. And same argument as to the creation date. Again, didn't show that it had been edited or manipulated and so on. But even though those were the arguments by Amber's team, ultimately there are reasons that didn't make it into court because it was just inadmissible for various reasons. It didn't go to issues in the case, and it was without foundation. And without foundation, for example, the expert who was attesting to this potential manipulation did not examine the devices in person, so there was no way of actually looking at those devices and saying, I've examined these devices and there is evidence of manipulation. It was merely the file. If I send you a file now and you save it on your computer, it will have a creation date of today because I've sent you the file. That's essentially what's happened here. And that's why there's a lack of foundation. There's no reason for that expert to be saying that these documents were modified or manipulated. And similarly, going on to psychological examination of Depp, the Depp team refused. It says here, but sounds paradoxical. So it leads you to believe that they sort of hidden or just refused to have a mental assessment of Johnny Depp. But again, there were several reasons for that. First of all, it wasn't something that was an issue, and there were other reasons to refuse it. And just moving briefly to the motions in limine to back up some of what I've just said, these are some of the arguments here, which was regarding the irrelevant issues in the case that was argued and lack of foundation. And so this Mr. Ackert was to testify that missing creation dates or modification dates post-dating the FAQS as a sign of digital evidence manipulation. This argues not only that it was evidence not at issue in the case, but his opinion is irrelevant and should be excluded because any opinion as to the authenticity lacks foundation because he has not had any forensic imaging of Depp's devices and could not competently opine as to the authenticity of any evidence produced, having never actually analysed the data. So I just thought that would be interesting to share with you, because it just shows how some of these media reports can seek to make you believe one thing or another, which of course is not surprising. These articles can very easily lead you to believe one thing or another, depending on how they're written and the wording that they use. If I were the lawyer to advise some of these companies writing such articles, I would be saying to be very careful about that wording, because the translation is fairly accurate, but it is also putting certain opinions and stating them as fact about certain people and what they're doing and why they're doing it, which ultimately are not entirely accurate. So I would have advised against doing that. So I thought you might find that interesting in this brief video. And as always, please do like the video and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.